Donald Trump and his authoritarian regime are taking a wrecking ball to the American Constitution. We are experiencing a full-blown constitutional collapse in this country. Article 1, which sets forth the powers of Congress, in deep, deep jeopardy as MAGA Republicans in Congress hand away the people's power to this authoritarian administration. Article 3, the courts have tried to stand up to Trump, but at the Supreme Court, we've seen the right-wing 6-3 Roberts majority do everything in its power to bend over backwards and avoid direct confrontation with this administration. The result is that constitutional power is very quickly being brought from the people's hands, from the hands of supposedly, they're supposed to be impartial judges in Article 3, into the hands of an unchecked, unaccountable executive branch where we have a president who is acting like a tyrant. My name is Alex Aronson. I'm thrilled to be with you here again at Midas Touch Legal AF with Court Accountability. That's the organization that I lead as executive director. We're here today to dig into these important and fast-moving constitutional dynamics with an incredible leader from the House of Representatives who has been part of the tip of the spear in fighting back against this executive overreach and abuse of power, as so many of her colleagues have been unable to shepherd the will, the force, the rhetoric, the courage to confront this abuse of power. I'm thrilled to be joined today here by Representative Delia Ramirez from Illinois' 3rd District. You might have seen her last week tearing into DHS Secretary Kristi Noem and giving her an absolute smackdown and a constitutional education about just how badly this administration is damaging things, holding her to account and demanding her resignation.
You, however, have been leading this work for 116 days. And in that time, you have profiled and dehumanized our neighbors. You've betrayed our constitutional commitment to due process. You've deported United States citizens. You've undermined the courts. You've broken the law. You've engaged in corruption, and you've weaponized the immigration system to violate civil rights. As Senator Murphy perfectly stated, your department is out of control. But you're responsible. You have betrayed the sacred fundamentals of your oath. And I believe to my core that you are not fit to hold the office. And I again, to your face, demand your immediate resignation. And I put it and place it on the record for all of us to see. With that, Chairman, I yield back.
Representative Ramirez, thank you so much for joining us, for your intrepid leadership. How did you approach that line of inquiry with DHS Secretary Noem? Why was it so important to confront all of the atrocities that she is committing in that role as DHS Secretary?
Yeah. Alex, thank you for that question. And look, I'm going to be pretty frank with you. Regardless of how people feel about the specifics about immigration, regardless of how people feel about what has happened at the border and people seeking asylum, what Secretary Noem is doing, has done in the last 120 days, is absolutely violate rule of law. She has decided that the things that have been written in the Constitution that she took an oath to protect no longer matter because she feels that she's empowered by this president and empowered even by our chairman of Homeland Security. What do I mean by that? First of all, start with, she doesn't even know some basic terms like habeas corpus, right? Which maybe that's why she thinks it's okay to continue to violate court orders. She's deporting United States citizen children. She's violating freedom of speech, abducting students for daring to protest or use freedom of speech. She's canceling programs that were actually authorized by Congress with no authorization, impounding funds that were allocated by Congress and then sending them with no procurement to Donald Trump's campaign donors to build private detention centers that she doesn't want us to conduct oversight on, and then vilifies a member of Congress for conducting oversight. I could go on, and as I said in my remarks in committee, which by the way, we all get 5 minutes, there were not enough 5 minutes available for me to be able to list it all out. But I said to her face, and I thought it was really important, you have violated your responsibility as the Secretary of Homeland Security. You're inept, incompetent, and a liar who is exercising corruption while conducting your job. And you need to resign. And when I say resign, I mean immediately. That's why, Alex, if you saw some other footage, I stayed for that entire committee hearing. I was the very first member of Congress to show up to committee. And I stayed to the very last moment, waited for her to be done in the committee room, getting applaud by the chairman. And then I physically handed over the letter that I have already sent to Homeland Security, demanding for a resignation. And was glad she took it, even thanked me. I suppose that she may consider the resignation she should take immediately.
Thank you so much for that bravery. And I think one of the reasons it caught such fire was that this is the kind of fight, in defense of the American people, of our ability to set the course for our future, that we need to have, right? I think in these first 120 days, Democrats have been looking around trying to figure out how to respond as Trump and his goons, people like Secretary Noem, have just shown such disrespect for the rule of law, for the will of the people, claiming this false mandate from the people on the back of a pretty narrow presidential election victory, and doing it in such a fashion that completely breaks down the basic framework by which we can resolve our disagreements. I think it's important the way you opened up your answer to my question there. It doesn't matter how you feel about these immigration issues. We all need to agree on basic precepts like due process and understanding of what foundational legal concepts like habeas corpus, which, what did she say? She said habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country, like almost literally the exact opposite of what habeas corpus is. And for somebody in her position, having sworn an oath to the Constitution, to have that big of a misconception of what this foundational right in our Constitution means is itself disqualifying.
Disqualifying and alarming.
Alarming.
I think about that. This is someone that has served in Congress for 8 years. She was a governor, of South Dakota for a number of years, and was sworn in as a Secretary of Homeland Security. I'm not going to cut some slack for her for not knowing basic terminology that she is responsible in ensuring that she is following in order to do her basic job. It's horrifying, but this is who she is.
Yeah.
You and I both know she wasn't selected, sworn in as a Secretary of Homeland Security because of her capacity, because of her competency, because of her experience. It was based on one thing: loyalty to Donald Trump and an ability to have, I guess, the courage or be the coward and the criminal to do whatever the hell she has to do to carry on his agenda of persecution, of incarceration, and deportation.
Yeah.
Disregarding due process, civil rights, freedom of speech, disregarding the courts, disregarding members of Congress. Because, Alex, when members of Congress, co-equal branch of government to her, which I wanted to make sure I got her on the record that, according to her, she understands that we're a co-equal branch of government. She doesn't treat us that way. That even when we do our basic responsibility of oversight, instead of extending an apology to the member of Congress who was harassed and treated horribly when she went to do oversight, instead she vilified her while she sat in committee. And then she went as far as saying, we are going to conduct an investigation on the member, not on HSI, not on her agents, not on her staff, not on the staff of the detention center, but on LaMonica MacGyver. Infuriating.
Yeah, and it's part and parcel of this broader Article 1 crisis. I think we've got an Article 3 crisis ongoing, and it was baked into the way you framed your remarks in that hearing with Secretary Noem. You brought up impoundment, you brought up respect for judicial orders. This same theme animates a bill you introduced recently to not only reaffirm birthright citizenship, which is right there in the Constitution, right there in the 14th Amendment. Kind of absurd that we're even having Supreme Court hearings on this, that this is subject for debate, that right-wing, dark money-funded operatives are getting platformed in the New York Times to justify a reading of the 14th Amendment that does not include birthright citizenship, which is absurd to anybody that can read English. And this bill you've introduced kind of wraps it all in, right? It reaffirms the plain understanding, the plain reading of the constitutional text, and it sets parameters. It says you will not use federal funds to execute this birthright, this unlawful, unconstitutional birthright citizenship agenda. Tell us more about that bill and how you thought through that structure. I think it's really smart.
Yeah. I mean, Alex, I think a part of what I've heard a number of people say, right? And we certainly say this in Congress as well. I'm frustrated that I even have to do this. The fact that we now have to be introducing legislation to affirm what is already law because of a fascist authoritarian government that wants to dismiss Constitution and law is crazy. And yet, it's one of the things that we have to do as the opposing party to this fascist government, right? This Born in the USA Act bill, I think one of my colleagues said he can't say it without wanting to sing the song. It really basically says two things, as you said. One, it affirms and codifies that what the Constitution says in the 14th Amendment, that if you're born in this country, you are a United States citizen, period. And two, is that we will prohibit any funds used that have been administered and authorized by Congress in order to be able to implement or execute this unlawful, unconstitutional executive order of revoking or repealing birthright citizenship.
And you got huge support, over 100 co-sponsors, incredible work. Thank you so much for your leadership on this issue. It sweeps in again with the prohibition on federal funding, this big question of the administration's refusal to spend funds that Congress has not only authorized but also appropriated. In some cases, these funds have been obligated to grant recipients, contract recipients. This is all illegal, right? They're inventing a completely contrived inherent executive authority that they've made up to claim that the president has the right to ignore what Congress has done in passing laws to direct spending. And it's a crisis if it's allowed to proceed.
I mean, Alex, it's a constitutional crisis we're living, and I don't take those words lightly. But what you are saying, the idea that they're pressing charges on members of Congress, arresting judges that they don't agree with their court's decision, completely dismissing congressional authority, impoundment of funds, unwilling to agree that you cannot use funds appropriated through Congress to deport United States citizens, as you saw in Judiciary and Homeland, where not one Republican was willing to vote on amendments that established and prohibited the use of funds to deport U.S. citizens. And all of that has brought us to a moment where, yes, the courts are overwhelmed. Of course they are. But that the Supreme Court has to ask that moral question. What is enough? And if our moral responsibility is to uphold our Constitution, then we also understand that changes to the Constitution can actually only be made through Congress, and certainly not through the executive branch and its executive orders.
How do you feel like things are developing? You mentioned the Republicans. They're in line right now. They're locking arms. We hear sometimes from elected officials in Congress that behind the scenes the Republicans are appalled by what they're seeing, and that if we just keep at it and show how unpopular and terrifying all of this is, we'll start to see some progress, and they might start to defect. Do you think that's a fair diagnosis? Do you think there's opportunity here? And then I guess lastly, how can an audience like we have here at Midas Touch Legal AF, we've got over 650,000 subscribers. These are folks that are really paying close attention. They're interested in the details. They want to find ways to engage. How can people engage directly and make a difference to try to right the ship and, backstop members like you who are showing this bravery and showing this fight?
Yeah. Well, thank you for those questions, Alex. First of all, I would say to you that we are beginning to see some shifts. You may not see it publicly, and it's certainly not quick enough, right? You see members of Congress who unfortunately don't want to vote for this big, beautiful bill, not because they're worried about the cuts so much as they want more cuts. So that part feels discouraging sometimes. But I will say, if you look at polls and national public opinion, even on the thing that Donald Trump, his marquee issue that he has been able to vilify and use and create fear and division, immigration, even there, he's beginning to weaken. And I'll tell you what we said at the beginning, Alex, of our conversation is people specifically are pissed off, Republicans and Democrats, that there would be a disregard to the courts and certainly to Congress, but to the courts specifically. Because on moral authority, if we're three equal branches of government, you don't disregard the courts. You follow rule of law. And that's not an R or a D issue. That is an issue for Americans. And it's part of the foundation of democracy. So I think that it's important that we continue to do the town halls, that you continue to amplify when you see courage from members of Congress. And I've said this to our leadership, and I certainly continue to say this everywhere. We have to be able to look at ourselves in the mirror and affirm the answer that when asked, are you doing everything in your power to obstruct this fascist government from getting away with cutting Social Security, healthcare, persecuting immigrants and deporting U.S. citizens, cutting public education, and that you could look at yourself in the mirror and say, yes, I am. And if we can't say that, then it's okay to say, I have to do more. And I can do that with the affirmation of constituents, of viewers, of others who are encouraging us and amplifying that voice. And Alex, it is a town hall. It is the calls. It is making sure that, you may live in a Democratic members of Congress district, but you have a cousin, you have a family member, you have a friend that lives in the other. Those calls have to continue. Those rallies have to continue to expand, and we have to double down. Here's what I say all the time. We gotta legislate, we gotta litigate, and we have to agitate.
Amen. Representative Delia Ramirez, thank you so much for taking the time to dig into these issues with us. Thank you for your leadership on these issues. We are such big fans of what you are doing, and we'll continue to amplify and back you up. Would love to have you back whenever. Thank you again for everything you're doing. Super inspiring stuff. And until next time, to our wonderful audience here at Midas Touch Legal AF with Court Accountability, don't forget, stay mad, stay motivated, stay mighty.
I'm Michael Popak, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touch's Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building on what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popak Firm, dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popak Firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event, by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my Legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states, and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popak Firm today at 1-877-POPAK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopakfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, we don't get paid unless you do. The Popak Firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.